Hello, we are going to be talking about complex numbers this week. So we're going to get a little, for this week, we're kind of put pause on some of the strictly trigonomic stuff like our sines, cosines, tangents, and all those right triangles. We're going to pause on that for a little bit. We are going to come back to that because I know a lot of you guys are like, what? Oh man, so sad. It'll be okay. We'll get back to that though, starting kind of next week, we'll get into that some. But what we want to do with these complex numbers, I kind of want to take a week to review what are complex numbers, how do they work, and what do we do with all of those things. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing this week is reviewing those complex numbers, which you probably did some in algebra and stuff before, but we just want to make sure we have those down. So that's what we're going to spend this week doing. So complex numbers, some people call them imaginary numbers, which is kind of true. They were called imaginary numbers for a long time, simply because people thought, well, there's no way we can work with them, so they're just imaginary. You can't do anything. But as it turns out, as people started to use electricity more and more and wanted to work with that, actually the complex numbers are very useful in that sense. So they do have a practical application. It's just that we're just going to talk about how some of that stuff works. And if you want to as well, there's a little video here kind of giving you a little more visualization than I'm able to do about what the complex numbers are. Just watch the first 2 minutes and 30 seconds here. The whole video itself is, I don't remember exactly how long it is, but I've got it set up so it would just play that first portion for you if you wanted to do that. But some other things with complex numbers, we use the letter C sometimes with a line, vertical line, if you don't want to write out the whole word and you just want to kind of, gosh, I forgot what the word is. Abbreviate. Oh man, lost my brain for a second. But yeah, if you want to abbreviate that, you can do that there. But essentially, complex numbers are designed and used to solve equations where you might have something squared equals a negative number, where you'd have to take the square root of a negative number, which for the most part, we usually just say, oh, that's not possible. But that's with a caveat. It's not possible under the real numbers. So we have to move up to the complex numbers. We have to expand our ideas of how many numbers there are. There are actually more than just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and negative 1, 2, 3, 4, than the positives or the negatives. There are also the complex numbers, which are sort of like doing an entirely new dimension. And I just realized here I still have this shader on here. So let's take that off. But that's what you guys can look at those. But main idea is what we're going to get to today is just what is a complex number. We write that as the number I, which can be a little bit confusing, especially from last week where we were talking about vectors, and now we're talking about I, the number. So there's two different things. I, the number, is the square root of -1. I, the vector, which we don't use quite as often, because those do get confused, but I, the vector, goes horizontally one space. This is a different shift. So now we're using I as a number, not a vector. When it's used as a number, it means the square root of -1. And we want to be very clear about which one we're using. And I'll try to do that too as we move on. And if you guys ever have any questions like, oh man, is he talking about the vector or the number I? But that is a little bit of a difference. Okay, I'll try and make that pretty clear. You guys can always ask me as well if you're not sure. All right, so on here, that's what I is. It's the square root of -1. That's it. There's no more to it. There's no mathiness there. That's its definition. That's what it is, right? There's no mathiness there. We're just going to say we're going to create a new number, and it's just called the square root of -1, and that is I. And how we work with that, how we use this here, so any square roots of any negative number is going to have an I in that. So that allows us to do square root of -25, right? In that case, the square root of 25 is 5. That's not too bad to do. So then we would say here, this is 5I. That's all that is, right? The square root of -43. Well, we might try and work out the square root of 43. Turns out the square root of 43 does not simplify. So you could change that to a decimal if you want, but you don't have to, right? We can just say this is I root 43, right? And change that to positive value. The I is representing that it had a negative square root in there. That's it, right? We can just leave it like this. You can leave things in radical form. Perfectly fine with me, which is why most of your homework now is going to be separate in like in a Google Doc, so that, you know, if you want to format square roots and stuff, you certainly can, because Google Sheets doesn't have that possibility in here. So in this one here, you know, if we want to do the square root of negative 50, in that case, right, we would say, well, the negative, but let's just do this. Square root of 50, the negative part, that's going to become I, right? We could write it like this. And now what you can do as well is you can also simplify square root. So for example, 50 is 25 times 2. So I mean, we could put this as well as 5 root 2 and then put our I at the very end. Sometimes I like to move the I, you know, in the very front so I don't accidentally think that it's underneath the square root. But you can put it in either spot, and that's not a big deal. And so that's pretty easy. This one here, this stuff sometimes confuses people a little bit because there's sort of that double negative, and they want to cancel both negatives, but we can't do that. Okay, we have to be a little bit careful there. In this one here, we have to be, you know, we have to do the square root of the inside stuff first. So here, what we'd have to do is say that this is negative I times the square root of 81. I'm going to do that at one step at a time. You know, I know most of you guys probably know that, okay, 81 is 9, and then we go from there. So here we'd have to take care of this negative in here first. Actually, we could put one more step in there. Let's put negative, so we can see square root of negative 1 and the square root of 81. Okay, so that we see we're separating this first. Okay, that would be technically what's happening. Because some people, when they go throughout this one, I'll have to move this around a little bit so that it fits under there. But some people, when they do that, they want to cancel those negatives, and that's not what we want to do in that case. Okay, we don't want to do that. So let me just make a new page so you guys can see that there now, and then I'll format it so that you guys have that. But here, these negatives do not cancel off. Okay, this becomes 9I, and then it's negative 9I. So being careful of that when you have some of those extra negatives on there. They don't necessarily cancel off right away. All right, last little bit here with complex numbers to start with, just kind of the basics. We can add or subtract complex numbers. It's just like adding or subtracting variables and things like that. It's nothing too major. So like here, you would just add together any like terms, anything that's not a like term, we would just leave. So like here we could do 12 plus 3 would be 15, and then the 2 and the negative 7 would be minus 5i. That's it, right? Nothing major. Big things in here, just keeping track of negatives. So this would be like 8 minus 5, that's 3. And then negative 5 minus negative 14. We just got to be careful. That's like negative 5 plus 14, which, lost track there for a second. Oops, would be plus 9i. I suppose I put that adding symbol in there. And that's all that is, right? Here, you might need to take a step in that part, right? So this first one would be 8 minus square root of negative 64 is 8i. So minus 8i here. And then we could put our plus 9 plus 10i, because that's the square root of 100 and it's negative. And so you take that one step first and then go through. 8 plus 9, okay, is 17. And the other i's together make 2i. Okay, nothing too complicated. This one here, I'm just going to take and simplify that a little bit. Let's see if we can grab this here, if it'll record it. Not there. Let's edit that equation. Okay, so if we went into here to do this one, okay, sometimes we can get things to simplify and keep things in radical form. That is perfectly okay to keep things in radical form. So like this one here, again, the negative portion becomes I, and then the square root of 27 breaks down into, I suppose, 9 times 3. So this here could break down into 3 times the square root of 3, right? 3 root 3. Here again, the negative becoming I, and 75 is 25 times 3, square root of 25 being 5. So, oops, put that actually in, the square root in there, 5 root 3. Okay, so that is a possibility there. And then since these things, I'm actually going to move the eyes to the back so we can kind of see what's happening there. Now, these two can technically be put together because they have both eyes and the square roots are the same. If the square roots are actually different, we can't combine them, we just leave them separate. But since these two are the same, we can actually combine this stuff together and say, you know, this is positive 3 stuff minus 5 stuff, right? So that would leave us with negative 2 stuffs. Okay, so that is a possibility as well. Let's format, you know, we'll put this down here so it's fairly neat in there. Yeah, so that's in those. You know, the main part is, you know, can we simplify those things? So that's kind of putting all that stuff together there. But again, your guys' assignment is on a different attachment, just so that if you want to format square roots or things like that, you can use the what's it called, formulas, I think, in Google Docs. So you can go ahead and use that as well if you want. It's just attached separately. Let me know if you got any questions. Otherwise, wish you luck.